The grand meeting hall in the presidential palace was so silent, you could hear a pin drop. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso looked directly into the eyes of the French ambassador and said, "We cannot speak of true cooperation until colonial debts are paid, Mr. Ambassador." The tension in the room was palpable. Ambassador Marcel Deveau hadn't expected such a direct confrontation from the young leader sitting across from him. The meeting had been planned for France to present a new economic aid package to Burkina Faso. But before the protocol speeches were even completed, Traoré opened a folder and slid an old photograph toward the ambassador. "Do you recognize this man, Mr. Ambassador?" Traoré's voice was calm, but firm. The midday sun filtering through, the tall windows cast shadows across the polished conference table between them. Deveau studied the black and white image. A French officer in military uniform smiled proudly, while behind him a row of African civilians knelt on the ground, hands bound. "No, I don't recognize him," said Deveau, clearing his throat uncomfortably. His fingers fidgeted with his silk. A sweat began forming on his brow despite the air conditioning. "This is General André Belair," said Traoré, his voice taking on an edge. "In 1956, he directed the insurgent cleansing operation in the Ouagadougou region. The people you see in this photograph are village leaders. All of them were executed by firing squad that same day." Deveau's face tightened. The other officials in the meeting room averted their eyes while members of the French delegation exchanged nervous glances. "Mr. President," said Deveau, carefully choosing his words, "history may contain painful chapters, but we are here today to discuss the future. France wishes to focus not on the past, but on new partnerships we can build with Burkina Faso." Traoré smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He thought of his grandfather, who had told him stories of that terrible time, stories that had shaped his resolve since childhood. "Interesting. You don't want to discuss the past, well?" He gave a hand signal to his assistant. The assistant walked to the large screen and pressed a button. A map of Burkina Faso appeared, marked with dozens of red dots. Each of these points represents a village destroyed during peace operations by French forces in the 1950s and 60s. According to estimates, more than 25,000 civilians were killed. But we don't know the exact number because most documents are still classified as national security. The screen changed to show an empty stretch of land. This is the Sankara Plateau. In 1958, there was a large village here, Namagoro. 3,000 people lived there. Traoré paused, the muscles in his jaw tightening. They were wiped out in a single night. Why? Because they wanted independence. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear him. "My grandfather was 7 years old when it happened. He was visiting relatives in another village. The only reason he survived." Deveau shot a worried look at his advisor, Dr. Henri Blanc, who coughed lightly and spoke up. "Mr. President, some documents from that period may still be classified. However, France has been trying to be more transparent in recent years. Important steps have been taken to confront the past." Traoré picked up another document from the table. "Confrontation. Let me show you a new document. We received it this week." He handed the paper to Deveau. It was an official French military order from 1959, commanding the suppression of pro-independence activities at any cost. "Any cost," Traoré repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Now, if you ask me, if we want to have real cooperation, we must first discuss these costs." A tense silence fell over the meeting room. Traoré looked directly into Deveux's eyes and continued, "Mr. Ambassador, I have a proposal for you. France should declassify all secret documents related to what happened in Burkina Faso during the colonial period. Let's establish a truth commission. Let's acknowledge what happened, apologize, and discuss compensation." Deveau looked stunned. "Mr. President, such a decision is beyond my authority. I would need to consult with Paris." "Of course," said Traoré. "I'm giving you 48 hours. If I don't receive an answer from Paris within that time, be advised that we will suspend all economic agreements with France and begin new partnership talks with China." A wave of shock spread through the room. Members of the French delegation exchanged worried glances. Burkina Faso possessed one of France's most important uranium resources in the region, and an agreement with China would be a serious blow to French influence. Deveau managed a strained smile. "Mr. President, this is quite a radical approach. Perhaps in a more moderate way." "Moderate?" Traoré's voice rose. "Ambassador Deveau, your country exploited our mines for 60 years, killed our people, and poisoned our land. And now you ask me to be moderate? 48 hours, Mr. Ambassador, your clock is ticking." Deveau stood up, frowning. "Mr. President, I will convey your request and return with an answer as soon as possible. However, threats should not be part of diplomacy." "This is not a threat, Mr. Ambassador," said Traoré in a calm voice. "This is a warning. Africa's new leaders will no longer act like the submissive leaders of the past. I'll see you soon." The meeting was over. As the French delegation quickly left the room, Burkina Faso's Foreign Minister Amadou Diop approached Traoré. "Mr. President, this is quite a risky move. France is our largest trading partner. If they refuse to disclose these documents," Traoré turned to Diop, "then we'll show them what we're going to do. We will no longer be oppressed, Amadou. We are the true owners of this land, and the world needs to know that now." In the silence that followed, Traoré could almost hear his grandfather's voice. "Never forget Namagoro. Never forget our people." That evening at the French embassy, Marcel Deveau was holding an urgent video conference with Paris. The Director of African Affairs at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Madame Suzanne Moreau, appeared on the screen. "This is absolutely unacceptable," said Moreau after hearing Devau's report. "Traoré is trying to corner us. We cannot disclose the documents. Not just Burkina Faso, but all our former colonies could make similar demands." "But Madame Moreau," said Deveau anxiously, his tie loosened and jacket discarded after the long day. "Traoré seems serious. An agreement with China would mean losing our uranium resources." "He must be bluffing," said Moreau in a definitive tone. "They can't come to an agreement with China. Their infrastructure isn't ready for it." "I'm not so sure," said Deveau, rubbing his temples. "China is already making large investments in Guinea, and Traoré is a different kind of leader from his predecessors. More determined." Through the embassy windows, he could see the lights of Ouagadougou, the city he'd come to know well during his 3 years as ambassador. He knew the mood on the streets had changed dramatically since Traoré had come to power. Moreau sighed. "All right, prepare a compromise offer. Say we can disclose some of the documents, but parts concerning national security will remain classified. Also mention that we could establish a historical research fund, but never use the word compensation." "What about the Truth Commission?" "Absolutely not," said Moreau sharply. "We cannot accept that. A Truth Commission implies an official apology, which could have legal consequences." Deveau nodded. "I understand. But what if Traoré rejects this offer?" Moreau thought for a moment. "Then we'll need to use other methods. Consult with our intelligence service, see if there's anything we can use against Traoré." "You mean blackmail?" "Let's call it political pressure, Mr. Ambassador," said Moreau with a cold smile. "Things in Africa don't always work through official channels." When the video conference ended, Deveau took a deep breath. Things were getting ugly. He wondered if Paris truly understood what was happening in Africa, or if they were still living in the colonial mindset of the past. The next morning, at the presidential palace of Burkina Faso, Traoré was meeting with cabinet members. The topic was the tension with France. "Mr. President," said Defense Minister General Konaté, "you know France won't back down easily. Cornering them could be dangerous." Traoré could feel the concern radiating from his cabinet, many of whom had served under previous, more compliant administrations. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles in the air, a reminder of the ongoing drought that was affecting farmers across the country. "What's dangerous, General?" said Traoré. is that our people's past, suffering is never acknowledged, justice is never served. France still sees us as their backyard. It's time to change that. Economy Minister Dr. Fatima Sankara spoke up. Mr. President, if we cut commercial ties with France, we could face major economic difficulties. China may not step in immediately. Dr. Sankara, said Traoré, do you know what the greatest success of the colonial mindset is? Making us think we can't survive without them. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had sworn to protect and elevate. Ouagadougou was bustling with morning activity. Market women setting up stalls, students rushing to school, workers beginning their day. These were the people he was fighting for. Just then, Traoré's assistant entered the room. Mr. President, excuse me. The French ambassador urgently wants to see you. He says he has an important message. Traoré nodded. Receive him. A few minutes later, Marcel Deveau entered the meeting room. There was tension in his face. Mr. President, I've received an answer from Paris, he said, getting straight to the point. The French government agrees to disclose some of the documents. They also propose establishing a fund to support historical research. Traoré smiled. Just some of them, Mr. Ambassador? And what about the Truth Commission? The apology and compensation? Deveau shifted uncomfortably. The French government thinks establishing a Truth Commission would not be appropriate at this stage. However, they offer the Historical Research Fund as a gesture of goodwill. Traoré stood up. So your answer is no. Very well, Mr. Ambassador. You can inform Paris that economic agreements between our countries are suspended, and we will begin talks with China. Mr. President, please don't rush, said Deveau urgently. Perhaps a compromise. Traoré cut him off. The time for compromise is over, Mr. Ambassador. Now is the time for action. Good day. Deveau opened his mouth as if to say something more, then thought better of it. Bowing his head, he left the room. The next day, Burkina Faso television made an extraordinary broadcast. Traoré addressed the nation explaining the diplomatic crisis with France and announcing the suspension of all economic agreements. Dear people of Burkina Faso, he said, looking into the cameras, his voice steady and resolute. We have no choice but to stand against powers that still treat us as a colony. These lands, watered with the blood of our ancestors, now belong only to us. We may face temporary economic hardships, but the price of freedom and dignity is always heavy. In his hand, he held his grandfather's medallion, the only thing the man had saved from Namagoro. The cameras didn't catch this detail, but for Traoré, it was a tangible connection to the past he was fighting to acknowledge. This speech resonated widely across Africa. Similar demands began to rise in other former French colonies. The hashtag, "Repay colonial debts," trended on social media. In Paris, the French government was in an emergency meeting. Ministers and advisors had gathered to discuss the situation in Africa. This is unacceptable, said the foreign minister. Traoré has started to influence other leaders. Leaders in Senegal and Mali are preparing to make similar statements. What should we do? Asked the prime minister. We have two options, said the defense minister. Either we overthrow Traoré, or we bow to the demands, at least partially. The overthrow option is risky, said the intelligence chief. Traoré is very popular among the people. Also, Russia and China have an increasing influence in the region. A coup attempt could turn into a full diplomatic scandal. The prime minister took a deep breath. Then let's try the path of compromise. Let's disclose some of the documents, the most harmless ones. We can establish a research commission, but not an official truth commission. And instead of compensation, we can create a fund under the name of development aid. As the ministers nodded in agreement, the foreign minister sighed. Still, this could just be the beginning. Traoré's demands won't end. 3 days later, the French foreign minister personally came to Burkina Faso. He was to have a private meeting with Traoré. They met at the presidential palace. Mr. President, said the minister, I've brought a new offer from Paris. We agree to disclose a significant portion of the documents. We also propose establishing a joint historical research commission. Finally, we are prepared to allocate a fund worth 500 million euros for Burkina Faso's development. Traoré listened carefully to the minister. What about an official apology and compensation? The minister hesitated. An official apology might be difficult at this stage. It could have legal implications. We can establish a fund under the name of development aid, but we cannot explicitly call it compensation. Traoré thought for a moment, turning his grandfather's medallion over in his pocket. The inscription on it read, "Remember." "I will consider your offer, Minister. But let me make one thing clear. This is just a beginning. France will need to do more to truly confront its colonial past." The minister nodded. "I understand, Mr. President. But you must also understand that such changes take time. You cannot change centuries-old policies in a day." "Perhaps," said Traoré, "but change must start somewhere, and that place will be us." 2 weeks later, a historic agreement was signed between Burkina Faso and France. France agreed to disclose documents relating to military operations in Burkina Faso between 1950 and 1970. A joint historical research and reconciliation commission would be established. Additionally, France would provide Burkina Faso with a development fund worth 500 million euros due to historical ties. At the signing ceremony, Traoré made a determined speech. "Today we are not just signing an agreement between two countries. Today we are changing the course of history. Today we are starting a new relationship based on true equality and respect. We appreciate this step from France, but this is just a beginning. True reconciliation requires all truths to be revealed and justice to be served." The French foreign minister also made a speech, but his words were more measured. France has the courage to confront the dark pages of its history. This agreement will be a joint effort to understand the past and look to the future. Our aim is to build a stronger, fairer partnership with Burkina Faso. The agreement received wide coverage in the international press. Many African countries congratulated Traoré for this bold move. Some former French colonies also began to make similar demands. In Paris, some politicians described the agreement as a dangerous precedent, while others defended it as an inevitable compromise. Traoré was looking at the old photograph in his office at the palace, General Belair and the village leaders about to be executed. "Justice may be delayed," he murmured, "but it will never be forgotten." 1 month later, the Historical Research and Reconciliation Commission held its first meeting. The commission, consisting of French and Burkinabe historians, researchers, and legal experts, would document events during the colonial period and prepare a report. At the opening session of the commission, Burkinabe historian Dr. Aminata Diallo spoke. "This commission will not only research the past but also shape our future. Our goal is not to seek revenge, but to reveal the truth and heal wounds." French historian Dr. Pierre Lefebvre also said, "History can sometimes be painful, but confronting, the truth will be healing for both France and Burkina Faso. This commission can open a new page between the two countries." As the commission continued its work, a new struggle had begun for Traoré. Now, as a leader more respected in the international arena, he was planning new projects for his country's development. His goal was not just to confront the past, but also to build a better future for his people. One day, while working in his office, his assistant entered. "Mr. President, I've brought you something," he said, extending a small box. Traoré opened the box. Inside was an old medallion. "This is the medallion of the only survivor from Namagoro village," said the assistant. "His grandson asked me to send it to you. It's inscribed, 'Remember.'" Traoré took the medallion in his hand, felt its weight. "We will not forget," he said. "And now, the world won't forget either." This was not just a diplomatic victory, but also a symbol of a nation's struggle for honor, and Traoré knew that this struggle had only just begun. He placed the medallion beside the photograph on his desk, two relics of a past that would finally be acknowledged. Outside his window, the sun was setting over Ouagadougou, casting a golden glow across the city. A new day was coming for Burkina Faso, a day of truth, dignity, and true independence.